My dad disowned me for choosing my dream. 2 years later he asked for my help. My name is Maya and I'm 28 years old. What I'm about to share with you is a story about dreams, family loyalty, and the price we sometimes have to pay for choosing our own path. It's about discovering that sometimes the people who should support us the most can become our biggest obstacles, and how life has a way of bringing everything full circle when you least expect it. I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, in a family where music wasn't just entertainment. It was business, legacy, and identity all rolled into one. My father, James Rodriguez, had built Rodriguez Entertainment from a small booking agency into one of the most respected artist management companies in country music. What started as him representing local bands in honky-tonk bars had evolved into managing Grammy-winning artists and organizing nationwide tours that filled arenas. The company headquarters occupied a restored Victorian mansion in Music Row, with gold and platinum records lining the walls and photographs of my father with country music legends displayed prominently in every room. Growing up, I spent countless afternoons in those offices, watching him negotiate contracts, plan marketing campaigns, and build careers for artists who trusted him with their dreams. From the outside, it looked like I had the perfect setup for a career in the music industry. I understood the business side from years of observation. I had inherited my father's ear for talent, and I had connections throughout Nashville that most people would spend decades trying to build. Everyone expected that I would join Rodriguez Entertainment after college and eventually take over the family business. But there was one crucial detail that everyone overlooked. I wasn't meant to be behind the scenes. While my father was busy managing other people's musical careers, I was developing my own. I had been writing songs since I was 12, teaching myself guitar and piano, and performing at local coffee shops and open mic nights whenever I could escape the family business obligations. My songwriting wasn't just a hobby or a creative outlet. It was my calling in the truest sense of the word. When I sat down with my guitar and a blank piece of paper, something magical happened. I could translate emotions into melodies, turn personal experiences into universal stories, and create something that hadn't existed before that moment. The rush I felt when a song came together perfectly was unlike anything I experienced in the corporate offices of Rodriguez Entertainment. During my college years at Belmont University, studying music business as a compromise between my dreams and family expectations, I continued developing my songwriting skills. I collaborated with other student musicians, performed at campus events, and slowly built a small following of people who connected with my original material. My songs dealt with themes of authenticity, independence, and finding your own voice. Ironically, all things I was struggling with in my own life. The tension between my artistic ambitions and family expectations reached a breaking point during my senior year. I had been offered an incredible opportunity, a chance to co-write with Sarah Mitchell, an established Nashville songwriter who had penned hits for some of the biggest names in country music. Sarah had heard my work through a mutual connection and was impressed enough to invite me to collaborate on a project she was developing for a major recording artist. This collaboration could have opened doors that typically took years to access. Sarah's reputation in the songwriting community was impeccable, and working with her would have given me credibility and connections that money couldn't buy. But accepting her offer meant turning down the management trainee position my father had arranged for me at Rodriguez Entertainment. When I told my father about Sarah's offer and my intention to pursue songwriting full-time instead of joining the family business, his reaction was more devastating than I had ever imagined possible. He didn't just express disappointment or concern about my career choice. He took it as a personal betrayal of everything he had built and everything he had planned for our family's future. The conversation took place in his office on a rainy Thursday afternoon in March, surrounded by all those gold records and photographs that represented decades of success in the music industry. But instead of feeling inspired by the evidence of what was possible in this business, I felt suffocated by the weight of expectations that had never really been mine to carry. My father's anger wasn't just about losing his planned successor. It was about what he saw as my rejection of his life's work. He had spent 30 years building Rodriguez Entertainment with the assumption that his daughter would eventually carry on his legacy. He had made sacrifices, worked countless hours, and built relationships throughout the industry partly because he believed he was creating something that would benefit future generations of our family. When I insisted that songwriting was my true passion and that I couldn't be effective managing other people's careers when my heart was set on developing my own, he interpreted my honesty as ingratitude and selfishness. He accused me of wasting the opportunities he had provided, of being naive about the realities of the music business, and of choosing an uncertain path over the security and success that were already waiting for me. The final ultimatum came at the end of that conversation. He told me that if I chose songwriting over joining Rodriguez Entertainment, I would be making that choice without his support, financial assistance, or blessing. He said that if I wanted to pursue my own dreams instead of contributing to the family business, I could do so entirely on my own. What hurt most wasn't the threat to cut off financial support. I had expected that possibility and was prepared to make my own way. What devastated me was the realization that my father couldn't see my songwriting as legitimate or valuable. To him, it was just a whimsical creative pursuit that I should be willing to abandon in favor of practical business responsibilities. That night, sitting in my small apartment near campus, I made the decision that would define the next chapter of my life. I called Sarah Mitchell and accepted her collaboration offer. I declined the management position at Rodriguez Entertainment, and I committed to proving that my dreams were worth the price I was about to pay for pursuing them. The next morning, I received a text message from my father that contained just 7 words. "Don't contact me until you come home." Those words marked the beginning of a 2-year period during which I would have no communication with the man who had raised me, taught me about the music business, and then disowned me for wanting to be part of it in my own way. The first year after my father disowned me was the most challenging and transformative period of my life. I went from being James Rodriguez's daughter with all the privileges and connections that identity provided, to being just another aspiring songwriter in Nashville trying to make it on talent and determination alone. The safety net I had never consciously relied on was suddenly gone, and I was forced to discover who I really was when stripped of family support and expectations. Sarah Mitchell became more than just a collaboration partner. She became the mentor I desperately needed during those early months. Working with her taught me that songwriting at a professional level was vastly different from the personal expression I had been practicing during college. Every word had to serve a purpose. Every melody had to connect with universal emotions, and every song had to tell a complete story within 3.5 minutes. Our first co-writing session took place in her home studio, a converted garage filled with guitars, keyboards, and recording equipment that looked modest compared to the high-tech facilities I had seen at major labels. But the magic that happened in that space was more powerful than anything I had experienced in corporate boardrooms. Sarah pushed me to dig deeper into my own experiences, to find the specific details that would make my songs authentic and relatable. The song we created together, called Breaking Free, was about a young woman choosing her own path despite family pressure to conform to traditional expectations. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was writing about my own life situation, but Sarah helped me craft the lyrics in a way that spoke to anyone who had ever felt torn between duty and dreams. The melody we developed had a haunting quality that stayed with listeners long after the song ended. Within 3 months, Breaking Free had been pitched to several artists and was ultimately recorded by Jessica Lange, a rising country star who was looking for material that reflected her own journey from small-town expectations to Nashville success. The song became the lead single from her album and reached number 12 on the country charts. My first taste of real success as a professional songwriter. But one successful song doesn't guarantee a sustainable career in Nashville's competitive music scene. I spent countless hours pitching my material to artists, publishers, and producers, facing rejection more often than acceptance. I waited tables at a restaurant in the Gulch to pay rent on my tiny studio apartment, often working double shifts to afford basic necessities while still having time to write and pitch songs. The financial struggle was constant and exhausting. I had gone from the comfortable lifestyle of a college student with family support to calculating whether I could afford both groceries and guitar strings in the same week. I learned to shop at thrift stores, cook simple meals at home, and find free entertainment in a city where most social activities seemed designed to separate musicians from their limited income. More difficult than the financial challenges was the emotional isolation. Nashville's music community is tight-knit, and many of my potential collaborators knew who my father was. Some treated me with curiosity, wondering why James Rodriguez's daughter was struggling to make it as a songwriter instead of working in the family business. Others seemed to assume I was just playing at being a starving artist before eventually returning to the security of Rodriguez Entertainment. But the hardest part was missing my father and having no way to share my small victories with him. When Breaking Free started getting radio play, my first instinct was to call him and share the excitement. When I received my first royalty check, I wanted to prove that my choice had been vindicated. When music industry publications started mentioning my name as an emerging songwriter to watch, I desperately wanted his approval and recognition. Instead, I channeled all of that emotion into my writing. The pain of family rejection, the struggle of financial uncertainty, and the determination to prove my worth became the raw material for songs that resonated with listeners who had experienced similar challenges. I wasn't just writing about hypothetical situations anymore. I was writing from lived experience, and that authenticity made my songs more powerful. My breakthrough came during my second year of independence, through a connection I never could have anticipated. Marcus Thompson, a veteran producer who had worked with some of Nashville's biggest stars, heard my work through Sarah Mitchell and was impressed by what he called my emotional honesty. Marcus was developing a project with a major label artist who was looking for songs that dealt with themes of family conflict and personal growth. The artist was Amanda Cross, our established country singer who was going through her own family struggles and wanted her next album to reflect the complexity of maintaining relationships while pursuing individual dreams. When Marcus played her some of my songs, including several I had written about my own experience with family estrangement, Amanda immediately connected with the material. Working with Amanda and Marcus opened doors I hadn't even known existed. They introduced me to other artists who were looking for authentic, emotionally resonant material. My songs started getting recorded by multiple performers, and my reputation as a songwriter who could capture complex family dynamics began growing throughout the Nashville community. The financial stability that came with regular songwriting income allowed me to move to a better apartment and focus entirely on my craft instead of splitting time between writing and restaurant work. More importantly, I was building a professional identity that had nothing to do with my father's connections or reputation. I was succeeding on my own merit, and the validation that came from that success was more meaningful than any approval I had ever received from family. But the success also highlighted how much had changed in my relationship with my father. I was becoming someone he didn't know, achieving things he wasn't aware of, and building a career in the same industry where he was a major player without any interaction between us. The music community in Nashville is small enough that he had to be hearing about my work, but neither of us had made any move toward reconciliation. By the end of my second year as an independent songwriter, I had co-written songs that had appeared on 3 different albums, received my first industry award nomination, and been invited to join the Nashville Songwriters Association International as a professional member. I had proven to myself and to the industry that I could succeed based on talent and hard work alone. But I was about to discover that success can sometimes create unexpected opportunities for the past to intersect with the present in ways that change everything once again. The phone call that would alter the trajectory of both my career and my family relationships was just around the corner, and it would come from the last person I expected to hear from. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 2 years and 7 months after my father had told me not to contact him until I came home. I was in my apartment working on a song for a new artist who specialized in contemporary country with rock influences, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Unsolicited calls in Nashville were usually from promoters or booking agents trying to sell services I couldn't afford. But something made me answer, and I heard a voice I hadn't heard in over 2 years. It wasn't my father calling directly. It was Maria Santos, his longtime assistant and the person who had essentially helped raise me during all those afternoons I spent at Rodriguez Entertainment offices. Maria's voice carried a tension I had never heard before, and she was calling because my father was in serious trouble. The story she told me was shocking in its scope and implications. Rodriguez Entertainment was facing a crisis that threatened to destroy everything my father had built over 3 decades. A former business partner had filed a lawsuit alleging financial mismanagement and breach of contract, seeking damages that could bankrupt the company. Worse, several major clients had terminated their contracts in response to the negative publicity, taking their business to competing agencies and leaving Rodriguez Entertainment with a drastically reduced client roster. But the legal and financial problems were only part of the story. My father had suffered a mild heart attack 6 weeks earlier, brought on by the stress of watching his life's work crumble around him. He was recovering physically, but Maria said he seemed to have lost the fighting spirit that had always driven his success. He was spending his days in the office staring at the wall of gold records, seemingly paralyzed by the magnitude of the challenges facing him. Maria explained that she was calling me because she believed I might be the only person who could help save Rodriguez Entertainment. Through her connections in the music industry, she had been following my career as a songwriter and was aware of the success I had achieved. More importantly, she knew that several of the artists I had worked with were managed by competing agencies and might be willing to consider switching to Rodriguez Entertainment if approached by someone they trusted. The irony of the situation was almost overwhelming. The father who had disowned me for choosing songwriting over the family business now needed my songwriting connections to save that same business. The daughter he had dismissed as selfish and naive had built exactly the kind of artist relationships that could provide a lifeline for his struggling company. But what Maria was really asking me to do went far beyond making a few phone calls or facilitating some introductions. She was asking me to step into a leadership role at Rodriguez Entertainment, to essentially become the person my father had originally wanted me to be, but under circumstances he never could have imagined. The family business I had rejected was now dependent on the career I had chosen instead. I told Maria I needed time to think about her request, and I spent the next 3 days grappling with emotions I thought I had resolved long ago. The anger I felt toward my father for cutting me off had evolved into something more complex over 2 years of independence. I had proven that I could succeed without his support, but I had also discovered how much his approval had meant to me and how painful his rejection had been. The practical side of Maria's proposal was actually quite compelling. Rodriguez Entertainment's client roster had shrunk, but the company's infrastructure, reputation, and industry connections were still valuable assets. If the right artists could be brought in to replace those who had left, the company could recover and potentially become stronger than before. My songwriting career had given me insights into what artists really wanted from their management, and I had relationships with performers who were dissatisfied with their current representation. But the emotional complexity of the situation was far more challenging than any business analysis. Working with my father would mean setting aside 2 years of hurt and anger. It would mean risking the independence I had fought so hard to achieve. Most importantly, it would mean having a conversation with him that we had both been avoiding for over 2 years. After 3 days of internal debate, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called Maria back and told her I was willing to meet with my father, but only under specific conditions. The meeting would take place in a neutral location, not in his office surrounded by symbols of the empire he had built. We would discuss the business situation as professionals, not as estranged family members trying to repair a damaged relationship. And I would make my own decision about whether and how to help, based on what I learned about the current state of Rodriguez Entertainment. The meeting was scheduled for the following Friday afternoon at a quiet coffee shop in the Gulch, far from Music Row and the industry networking spots where we might encounter mutual acquaintances. I arrived early and chose a corner table where we could talk privately, feeling more nervous than I had before any songwriting pitch or industry meeting. When my father walked in, I was shocked by how much he had aged in 2 years. The confident, energetic man I remembered had been replaced by someone who looked tired, uncertain, and smaller somehow. The heart attack had clearly taken a physical toll, but the stress of watching his company collapse seemed to have affected him even more profoundly. The first few minutes of our conversation were awkward and formal, as we both struggled to find an appropriate tone for discussing business matters while navigating the emotional minefield of our estranged relationship. But as he began explaining the details of Rodriguez Entertainment's current situation, I started to see a side of my father I had never witnessed before: vulnerability, uncertainty, and a willingness to admit that he needed help. The financial picture was worse than Maria had initially indicated. The lawsuit was seeking damages that would require selling the Music Row property and liquidating most of the company's assets. Several longtime employees had already been laid off, and others were looking for new jobs because they didn't believe the company could survive. My father had been forced to take out personal loans to cover basic operating expenses, and his own financial future was now tied to the company's survival. But what struck me most was his acknowledgement that the industry had changed in ways he was struggling to understand. The traditional model of artist management that had made him successful for 3 decades was no longer sufficient in an era of social media marketing, streaming revenue, and direct fan engagement. He needed someone who understood both the traditional business fundamentals and the new realities of how artists build and maintain careers. As he finished explaining the situation, I realized that this conversation represented more than just a business opportunity or a family reconciliation. It was a chance to take everything I had learned during 2 years of independence and apply it to challenges that were bigger and more complex than anything I had faced as a solo songwriter. It was also an opportunity to prove that my rejection of the family business hadn't been about avoiding responsibility, but about insisting on doing things my own way. Sitting across from my father in that coffee shop, watching him describe the collapse of everything he had spent his life building, I experienced a moment of clarity that surprised me with its intensity. This wasn't just about saving Rodriguez Entertainment or proving that I could step into a leadership role I had once rejected. This was about choosing what kind of person I wanted to be when faced with the opportunity to help someone who had hurt me deeply, or to walk away and let them face the consequences of their choices alone. The practical side of the decision seemed straightforward. I had built relationships with artists who were looking for better management representation. I understood both the creative and business sides of the music industry in ways that could benefit Rodriguez Entertainment's recovery efforts. I had proven my ability to succeed independently, which meant I could negotiate from a position of strength rather than desperation. But the emotional calculation was far more complex. Helping my father would require setting aside 2 years of anger and hurt. It would mean risking the independence I had fought so hard to achieve. Most importantly, it would require trusting that he had learned something from this crisis about the value of the path I had chosen and the person I had become. I told him I would consider his situation and provide an answer within 1 week. During those 7 days, I consulted with Sarah Mitchell, who had become both a professional mentor and personal friend. I spoke with several of the artists I had worked with, gauging their interest in potentially switching management representation. I also did my own research into Rodriguez Entertainment's financial situation and the legal challenges they were facing. What I discovered was that the company's problems, while serious, were not insurmountable. The lawsuit had merit but could likely be settled for significantly less than the damages being sought. The client defections had been damaging, but several of the departing artists had left for reasons that could be addressed with better communication and more personalized service. Most importantly, the company's reputation for integrity and professional excellence remained largely intact despite the recent difficulties. More significantly, I realized that this crisis represented exactly the kind of opportunity one had been unconsciously preparing for during my 2 years of independence. Every challenge I had faced as a struggling songwriter, from financial uncertainty to industry rejection to building relationships from scratch, had taught me skills that were directly applicable to rebuilding Rodriguez Entertainment. My answer, when I delivered it the following Friday, came with conditions that reflected both my professional requirements and my personal boundaries. I would join Rodriguez Entertainment as a partner, not as an employee returning to the family business. I would have complete authority over artist relations and strategic planning, with the freedom to implement new approaches to client service and business development. Most importantly, my songwriting career would continue to be my priority, and the management work would be structured around that commitment rather than replacing it. The financial arrangement I proposed was based on performance rather than family obligations. I would take a reduced salary during the company's recovery period in exchange for a significant equity stake that would vest based on measurable improvements in client satisfaction and revenue growth. This structure ensured that my success would be tied directly to the company's recovery, while also protecting my independence if the arrangement didn't work out as planned. My father accepted these terms immediately, with a gratitude and respect that felt entirely different from the family dynamics I remembered from my childhood. He wasn't offering me a position because I was his daughter who should fulfill family obligations. He was accepting my partnership because I brought skills and relationships that could save his company. The first 6 months of our collaboration exceeded both of our expectations. Using the relationships I had built as a songwriter, I was able to attract 3 new clients whose careers were at exactly the stage where excellent management could make a transformative difference. More importantly, I implemented new approaches to client communication and strategic planning that addressed many of the complaints that had led to previous client departures. The legal settlement was reached 4 months after I joined the company, for approximately 30% of the original damages sought. While still significant, this amount was manageable through a payment plan that didn't require liquidating major assets. The negative publicity that had surrounded the lawsuit began to fade as word spread about Rodriguez Entertainment's new direction and improved client services. But the most important transformation wasn't in the company's financial situation. It was in the working relationship between my father and me. For the first time in our lives, we were interacting as professional equals rather than as parent and child with predetermined roles and expectations. He deferred to my expertise in areas where I had more current knowledge, while I learned from his decades of experience in aspects of the business I was still mastering. The songwriting career that had caused our original conflict became one of the company's greatest assets. My ongoing work with artists gave me insights into their creative processes, career goals, and professional frustrations that informed better management strategies. Artists felt more comfortable working with a management team that included someone who understood their creative challenges firsthand. By the end of my first year as a partner in Rodriguez Entertainment, we had not only recovered from the crisis but had positioned the company for growth that exceeded its previous peak performance. We had attracted 8 new clients, including 2 who had left competing agencies specifically to work with our revitalized team. More importantly, client satisfaction surveys showed dramatic improvements in communication, strategic planning, and career development support. The success was gratifying professionally, but the personal transformation was even more significant. My father began acknowledging publicly that my songwriting career had given me perspectives and skills that made me a better business partner than I could have been if I had simply followed the traditional path he had originally envisioned for me. He started referring to clients as our artists rather than my artists, reflecting a genuine partnership rather than a mentoring relationship. Today, 2.5 years after he asked for my help and 4 years after he disowned me for choosing my dreams over family expectations, Rodriguez Entertainment is thriving in ways that combine the best of traditional artist management with innovative approaches that reflect current industry realities. My songwriting career continues to flourish, with my dual perspective as both creator and business professional making me more effective in both roles. The relationship with my father has evolved into something neither of us could have imagined during those painful conversations 4 years ago. We're not just family members who have reconciled. We're professional partners who respect each other's expertise and collaborate effectively toward shared goals. The business that once represented everything I was rejecting has become the platform for implementing many of the innovative ideas I developed during my years of independence. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from proving others wrong, but from finding ways to transform conflict into collaboration. My father's crisis forced both of us to reconsider assumptions about success, family loyalty, and the relationship between personal dreams and professional responsibilities. The company that almost died because of his inability to adapt to change has been revitalized by embracing exactly the kind of creative thinking he once dismissed. The daughter he disowned for choosing her own path became the partner who saved his life's work, but only after he learned to value the very qualities that had driven her away in the first place. Sometimes we have to lose everything to discover what really matters, and sometimes the people we push away become the ones who show us how to rebuild stronger than before.